Welcome back. It is Tuesday night here, and we are getting defensive. Brought to you by Gridiron Ratings. With me, as always, on Tuesday nights, we have James. James, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well, ready to dive back in. I know I was out last Tuesday, so I'm overly eager. Twice as excited as I normally am.
Sweet.
I forgot that already. My mind is all over the place with waking up in the middle of the night to change diapers and everything. So glad to have you back this week.
How's that newborn doing?
Baby's doing great.
Great.
Older kids, it's a little bit more adapting to a little less attention, and us, it's again a little less sleep while we're, baby waking up in the middle of the night. So
Yeah.
we're all doing fine here, thankfully, and that's what matters.
You're hanging in there. The baby's doing great. Love it.
How are you doing tonight, Gary?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited to get through these topics. They're good. I like this.
Yeah, so jumping in tonight, we're going to be going through sort of a version in the main topic here of Gary's on the clock, but with camp stuff going on. And that you had these things as kids, like if you had one of each of these items and you had to keep one and get rid of one or whatever, what would you do? And it kind of made sense to maybe try that and see how it works tonight. So if any of you have feedback on what you think about once we get into that, please let us know. But we do have a couple news items here, and none of them I think are anything huge probably for IDP leagues, but in deeper leagues, they could have some effects. So I'm just going to go over each of them, and if anything trips your trigger specifically on one of them, let us know. First up, Raekwon McMillan had a one-year deal signed with the Patriots, and he tore his ACL. I believe they said it was the opposite ACL that he had torn prior, so he's going to be missing this season. The Bears signed Alec Ogletree, former first-round pick of the Rams, and he bounced around to a couple other teams here. It looks like it's a one-year deal for him, too. And then Gerald McCoy, the longtime Tampa Bay Buccaneer who had a brief stint with the Cowboys and then got hurt last year in the summer. He signed a one-year deal for about $2 million with the Raiders. So, Gary, I'll let you have first bite at this. Do any of these have any sort of relevance in terms of those around them or the players specifically for IDP leagues?
Well, as a Ohio State fan, I'm really, I feel so bad for Raekwon McMillan. He was so primed a couple of years ago to come into the league. He was doing so well in camp his rookie season. He was slated to become, one of their starters. And lo and behold, on the first preseason game, first special teams series, I believe, tore his ACL. There was some kind of serious injury, and he was out for the entire season. And since then, this guy has just not been able to do anything. I think we missed out on a great IDP player, fantasy football, NFL player, whatever. As for Jared McCoy, he can definitely make an impact on that Raiders defense with the line. I'm not sure what kind of IDP impact that's going to be, though. I'm probably, if I'm adding him, I'm adding him after I put all my starters or get all my starters off the lineup or drafting or whatever. And what was the other one?
Alec Ogletree signed with the Bears for a one-year deal.
Considering that the only person that he could really replace in a starting lineup would be Danny Trevathan, and Ogletree can't cover worth a crap, which is that position. I don't think that he'll come and play unless maybe Roquan Smith falls out. If he gets injured, something misses a couple of games. Knock on wood, he doesn't. Other than that, it's a depth play. I don't know if he'll be on the final roster, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, there's always a risk with those one-year deals. James, what do you think about any of those?
Yeah, as far as McMillan goes, it's definitely unfortunate just because you don't want to see players continually get hurt. You want to see them at least get some sort of opportunity to prove they're tired or done or whatever it may be versus just get hurt and then disappear. And that kind of looks like where he's going. He's going to probably get one more camp shot, and after that, he'll be done. That's even if he wants to rehab and come back, or if he's just kind of exhausted at this point. So unfortunate, but it's football. This happens, and that's what's going on. As for McCoy, I do think he has some sneaky upside in the sense of short-term play. That Raiders defensive front is very, very up in the air as to who's doing what, where, why, and when. And we know McCoy has skill and talent. Maybe that's in the past and not in the current. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on, especially if you have a defensive tackle position in your lineup, because if he does get that starting spot, and there are going to be teams that run on that Raiders team, he could find himself getting a lot of that production by default. Not to say I'm saying go out and draft the guy, but pay attention to him, because if he succeeds, it's not going to be a shock. It's just not kind of what anyone would expect. You're kind of looking for more rotational play. And as for Alec Ogletree, I echo everything Gary said. He looks like he could maybe take Trevathan's spot, and that's if Trevathan just gets hurt / is just somehow horrendous. And while I don't expect that to happen, you could have Roquan Smith go down. He slides in there. And if he does play, the defense is going to be picking on him. So he could be getting a lot of tackle volume. So again, it's kind of worth noticing. If you're in a super deep league and you're drafting people because they're on a roster right now, these guys are worth perking your ears up for. But outside of D tackle leagues, none of them are relevant in your standard typical size league.
Yeah, McCoy's the only one that I thought really had any possible immediate value when you're looking at it here. He had, besides being injured, all of last year, he had played, it looks like more than 12 games each of the past handful, 8 years or so, and he's getting at least 5 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss in every year, which if you're playing in those interior alignment or defensive tackle leagues, those are usually how you're going to be making your money for points. So if he does end up starting, especially with the other players around him, he won't be solely focused on like he was at times in Tampa there. So he's the only one I'm really keeping an eye on too. So
yeah, and that defensive line is atrocious. Well, they've gotten a little bit better, but maybe with Crosby didn't live up to anything last year. I'm not going to hack up the other defensive names. So
Yannick Ngakoue.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still questionable about him if he's really the real deal. And actually, I'm not that questionable about it. I'm not a believer. And then you got Jonathan Hankins. So I'm really curious how much better it gets with an older McCoy on there. And it really depends. Is he playing the 2 technique? Is he playing the 3 technique? What's going to happen? But I mean, definitely a good flyer if you're looking for someone. The guy's, he's done it in the past, so that's a benefit.
That is it for our sort of news topics this week. And sort of like you have seen on the Thursday show, we're going to be getting in here, sort of quick little topic here. And James this week is going to be talking to us about league settings. So take it away.
Yeah, and it's kind of a topic that every single podcast should really address because it's imminently important. If you're listening to Getting Defensive, that means you play in an IDP league. You play in an IDP league, you're not playing in a standard league, which means you're kind of further in the weeds than most fantasy players. And while that's great, you need to know your league settings. I'm sure you're probably aware that if you want to be good at this game, it's not just is player X better than player Y, and that's all you pay attention to. Are you in a big play league? You get a lot of points for turnovers. Are you in a league where your DBs just have absolutely no value because you don't get a lot of points for interceptions and there's no pass deflection points? Are you in a super deep league where the league is so deep that the FA wire is absolutely useless and you need to just target a certain section because the league's 50 or 60 picks deep? These are all very specific settings to your specific league, and you need to know these because when we talk about topics and we talk about players, we're not talking about your exact league. You're the only one who knows your league. You know your league better than ours. But the reason you listen to us is we talk in generals. We talk about who we like over another guy. When we play our pick one bench one, sell one game coming up here shortly, it's because we're saying who do we like overall better. You need to know what goes on in general in order to be an expert in your league. If your settings overvalue sacks, don't be afraid to, quote, pay a premium and trade for someone, even though some Twitter avatar might say, oh, that's a bad trade. Well, they don't know your league settings. You do. If you're in a league where tackle-heavy LBs just don't really play as much as they do in general, don't be afraid to sell one and get a bad trade, because that's what everyone on Twitter says. You need to understand your league settings, and frankly, it's not talked about enough. We talk about it plenty. It's not like it's not a topic, but your league is so unique. Every league, the slight variations are what win people leagues and lose people leagues. Don't think that your league is close enough to what we're talking about to just take what we say as gospel. Understand you need to take what we're saying, use that information, and make a decision, not just take the information and determine a decision solely on the information. You need to keep going beyond just what we say. And I just think it's a vital thing that really I want to talk about every time we talk, because the league settings matter more than anything. So know them like the back of your hand.
Exactly.
Yeah, and sometimes just a little comment off of that. Knowing your league members helps you know your league settings too, because when you learn sort of how different players operate within your league, whether it's the draft, people that like to trade more, go off of waiver wires, it's sort of not an inherent setting of the league, but how the league operates. And knowing that too can just be vital when you're preparing yourself for a draft or trying to do in-season moves. So, and that's something we won't know anything about.
And if you're new to IDP, folks, I mean, these score settings can be crazy. So I love this being brought up by James, because you basically, if you have a good commish, if you have a person there that made this and know what they're doing, then there's one simple question you can ask the commish if you do not understand or you're unsure. And that is the simple fact of, what kind of scoring format is this for the IDP? They're either going to tell you it's tackle heavy, balanced, or sack heavy. There's only 3 options. And you need to adjust what you do drafting or playing in this league. If you're taking an orphan or whatever, just like James says, it does matter. You've got to know this. Good stuff.
Alrighty. So moving into the topic that we've alluded to here a bit, this is a sort of a start bench cut that we're talking about. We're going to look at, we have 6 listed here. We'll see if we get through them. Position groups from different teams. We have, to the best of our ability, figured out who's currently sort of listed and projected to be starters for these teams or fighting it out to be a starter. And we're going to tell you who they are, and we're going to give you our thoughts on who we would start, bench, and cut if we had all 3 of these on our fantasy team. So we're going to start off with one that historically been sort of a mess to wade through to keep it a little fun, but they're names that we all know in the IDP world. Patriots linebackers, we have Kyle Van Noy, Dante Hightower, and Matt Juden. So, Gary, we'll go to you. Out of these 3, and you can go in whatever order you want, which one are you going to start, which one are you going to bench, and which one are you looking to cut in a balanced scoring league?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is we were in agreement to begin with. This is a balanced format, folks.
Yep.
So, man, tell you the truth, don't want any of them. But if I'm in one of those 32 team leagues, 18 team leagues, something crazy like that, and I got depth, and say I really need somebody, I'm probably going to go Matt Juden. I'm gonna hope that he can repeat some serious sacks. I don't know. There's a funny thing about the Patriots, because the way that Bill Belichick brings that defense out, even though there is a defensive coordinator, this is Bill Belichick's defense. The way it comes out, I think Juden's been signed. He'll play a lot of snaps. They'll rush him a lot. They'll do the same thing with Kyle Van Noy. And the only reason that I'm taking Juden is I believe Kyle Van Noy's a little bit more wore out than Juden is. And I'm going to I'm not going to start. I got to be honest. I'm not going to start any of these guys unless I'm really deep or in edge rusher. And maybe I need an edge rusher or something. And I would start Juden. And I would probably, in that same sense, I'm going to bench Kyle Van Noy and see what he does. See which one between Juden and Van Noy is really going to perform this year, because Dante Hightower has never, ever, ever hit triple digits as far as I know. If he has,
you're right. He has.
It had to be 101, right? He got right. He's a main cog in that defense. He did sit out last year, but he's back and he's going forward. They're gonna play him just like he runs that defense. But he has this thing where he just doesn't produce. So I'm not keeping him.
James, how do you feel about those three?
Yeah, well, I think this is actually a perfect segue after my league settings topic, because I'm going to go and continue to talk about your league settings. Where does Matthew Judon qualify? To me, these three players are all neck and neck, kind of like what Gary said. I'm not really interested in any of them in terms of investment and seeing themselves as a weekly starter for me. But I know in sleeper leagues, Matthew Judon qualifies at your defensive line and at your linebacker position. So should you hit that lottery ticket and Matthew Judon becomes much more than any of the three of us, and I'm assuming Craig agrees with me, thinks that he'll be, well, you have a great defensive lineman in addition to a great linebacker. So give me Matthew Judon. I'll start him at my DL position. I'll draft some better linebackers to actually start, and he's my start. As for my bench...
To be clear, you're talking about sleeper. Basically, you're looking
Exactly.
at sleeper. Right. Okay.
Exactly. I'm talking in a sleeper world in a balanced league. That's the league setting for this entire conversation.
Yep.
And in that world, Matthew Judon qualifies at linebacker as well, defensive end. So that's why he's my selection. In a world where he doesn't, it's a much tougher question. Since that's not the world I'm living in, give me Judon. For my bench, I think I'm going to go Van Noy. And my reasoning for Van Noy is solely, I think when he is on the field and he is playing at a high volume of snaps, he's going to produce. And do I think he's going to do that? I'm not really sure, and I'm leaning towards no. But in a world where he doesn't play a high volume of snaps, I have no issue cutting him and just letting him walk right away. Whereas I think Hightower is going to get plenty of snaps and provide plenty of reason for optimism, and he will, yet again, as Gary suggested, not reach that 100 tackle threshold and be very disappointing based on his volume. And I'd rather just not deal with that and have that roster flexibility to, in the future, cut one of these guys and actually make a play for a player I like a lot more. So that's why Hightower's off, Van Noy's on the bench, and Juden's starting at defensive end.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything different than you guys. My order that I had sort of written down here for myself is the same. And, to your point about sort of that hope eternal for Hightower that, some people have had every year here, like, for the past 5 years that he's played, and 6 years, because he didn't play last year, but the past 6 years that he's played, the highest combined tackles that he's had in the Patriots defense is 71, which is just not what you're going to want. Even in a balanced scoring league, those guys that are getting you the tackles for a loss and more sacks are going to outscore him when he's just not getting those tackles. So we're in agreement on that one.
Yep.
Gary, I think we have a question here in the chat.
Ooh, let's go.
Yep.
So Vic Z says that he wants to know, first of all, what we think about Josh Allen, defensive end in Jacksonville. He needs some help there. And he was offered him for A.J. Dillon, who he has at running back. He said it's a hard to trade offense for defense for him. What do you think? And Vic, if you're still listening, if you can sort of put down there, like, any idea about scoring, like what sort of scoring format you have?
I have a good one here.
Talking about.
So I'm talking about league settings, and I'll say in this one, there's no league setting where I'm going to take Josh Allen over A.J. Dillon. I'll say that right now. There's a lot of question marks going on whatever the heck is going to happen to that Jacksonville defense, and there's not a lot of question marks with A.J. Dillon. He's the number 2 running back. He's the guy behind Aaron Jones. He's not going to play unless Aaron Jones gets hurt, but if he does, he is a premier running back. Mm-hmm. There's not very many scenarios where Josh Allen is the premier defensive end. And if he is somehow a premier defensive end in your league, he probably isn't even producing at what a premier A.J. Dillon would. So give me Dillon. Let me sit on that. I'm not going to make that move unless you're talking a league where your top defensive linemen score the same as quarterbacks. It's not a question. If you got standard settings, like I think Vic just said, give me A.J. Dillon. Don't overthink this. Let somebody else worry about what's going on in Jacksonville, and you can just try and trade for the guy once it gets sorted out, if that's what you need to do.
Yeah, total agreement there. I mean, it could be a sack-heavy scoring format for IDP. Unless this stuff is so jacked up that IDP is completely worth more than offensive players, which doesn't happen, folks. Rarely happens. It's a purpose league at that point. Maybe I consider it, but nah, I'm in agreement with James. I am not making that trade.
Yeah, based on what we saw from Allen last year, especially, if he had continued to improve and he's one of these top tier defensive ends, I think maybe if you could get something kicked back for me, I'd consider it. But after the complete mess of last year and just being me, I have no idea what you're going to get out of him at this point. I wouldn't be making the trade either. So
that's the funny thing about IDP, folks. You can find serviceable players a lot easier than you can an offensive player. So, unfortunately, in this day and age, offense is always going to take that little half tier to a tier or more worth of value just based off of its offense. There's fewer of them that matter or that will matter if something happens, like James mentioned. So, yeah, no, I don't think I would either.
If you have any more questions, please throw them in the chat for us. We will get to them here tonight. But we'll move on now to our second group, and it's another group of linebackers where it's sort of a little mess again, like it was last year, about what may happen. And James, we'll go to you first. With the Philadelphia Eagles, we have TJ Edwards, Eric Wilson, and Alex Singleton. So out of those three, what are you doing with them?
These are good questions because I really don't want to have to decide what to do with any of these three because I'd like to find myself in a scenario where I don't need to make this choice. But since that's not the scenario I find myself in right now, I'll make a choice. I'm going to start Alex Singleton. We're doing a standard league. It's not a dynasty league. Alex Singleton is the least sexy of these three guys, and by no means are any of these guys winning the Sexiest Man of the Year award. But Alex Singleton should get you some production. He should be able to produce when it's time for him to produce, and he will fail when he's going up against teams where he should fail, and he'll give you what you're expecting. And I'll take that out of this group. I love Eric Wilson, but I don't love him in the Eagles uniform, which is why I'll throw him on my bench. And if he shows some great signs of life like he did last year in Minnesota, he'll easily move into that starting slot. But for now, I'm just skeptical that anyone wants to use him like that. He sat out in free agency for forever, eventually signed a very team-friendly deal with the Eagles, and it seems to me like he's not seen as an every-down player, even though he was an excellent fantasy player last year. So be it. That is what it is. And then I'll cut TJ Edwards. It's not that I think TJ Edwards is really any worse than these three guys. It's just I got to cut one of them and not three of them. So I'll cut TJ Edwards.
Yeah, TJ is the one that's cut. There was a little bit of hope for him last year. I do believe we have a new coaching staff, right, in Philadelphia. So a whole new approach maybe to this whole situation, and maybe the linebackers kind of work out a little bit better. But to be honest with you, when it comes between Singleton and Wilson, neither one of them even really graded out as average players last year. And we do believe in production by default. That means if the guy's a starter because of whatever reason, yeah, he's going to get tackles. I have to think right now. When I just was actually typing in to see what their grades were, and I've never been an Eric Wilson fan. I think he was productive by default last year with Minnesota in that system. prior to Barr going down, Eric Wilson has been the starter at weak side linebacker in that weird scheme that they use, but he never played every down. He was a 40% or less type player with Barr in. It was when he got his chance, so he was productive by default. There's a reason that he wasn't one of the first guys signed in the all season as a linebacker. He wasn't one of the first ones signed. Whether I don't know what Philadelphia paid him, but they needed to bring somebody in. I might bench Wilson, and I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ride that hot hand that Alex had last year, Singleton. He right place, right time, productive by default means something, So I wouldn't be surprised if entering next year, all three of these guys are not even in a topic about who they're starting, because eventually the new regime or the new coaching staff should approach this situation and get at least one linebacker out of the draft, all free agency, something to secure this and be done with it, because Philadelphia hadn't done that since who was the last? Jordan Hicks? Is that the last major decent, and he was hurt all the time in Philadelphia.
Yeah, him, Michael Kendricks, maybe. I mean, that's the same era.
Right, Mike. Yeah. So it's been a long time coming. If I was an Eagles fan, I'd be banging on the table to find me a linebacker next year. Like KJ Wright. Why is he still? I mean, he could fill in with them, probably sign for a few million a year as long as he knows he's going to start. But as it is, I'm going to start Singleton. I'm going to bench Wilson, and Edwards is an afterthought now.
Cutting Edwards as well, so that's easy for me. I would flip a coin for the other two, honestly. I know that's probably like an easy way out, but the one thing that had some interest for me for Wilson is he's coming from that Mike Zimmer defense, and that's similar to what this new defensive coordinator with the Eagles has been with, because he was with Zimmer when they got to the Vikings, and he was with them for a number of years before going to the Colts. So familiarity sort of with that defense and how it works, I think it might play into Wilson's favor a little bit. But, Singleton was a guy there last year, and he didn't show poorly enough to be, I think, replaced by either of these guys, because neither of these other guys, to your point, were anything amazing themselves. So I'm fine with it either way. But if, you make me pick one, I'd probably lean a little bit towards Wilson, but it's just off of.
Yeah, it really is a flip of the coin. I mean, neither one of these guys are working off of high talent. They're working off instincts and opportunity. I think Singleton might have a little bit better instinct, but that's a mess to look at both of them last year because they were productive by default. So hopefully nobody is planning on these guys to be in your starting lineups week one.
All right, and we got another question from Vic Z here, and this is of that more rare, probably defensive tackle variety type question. So he is keeping Grady Jarrett and Kenny Clark at defensive tackle, and he needs to keep one more from this group. Tim Settle of Washington, Jaleel Johnson of Houston, or Sebastian Joseph Day of the Rams. He was thinking of keeping Settle due to his age in that Washington defense. So these names after the two obvious keepers are a little bit farther down in the barrel there. Gary, do any of those strike you or jump out to you right away?
Day maybe. I really, Vic, if you could get a hold of me or James or Craig on Twitter in a private DM, let's see what you got on the waiver wire, guy. I mean, this must be, since you're active right now, what size league is this? Is it 12, 14, 16, 32? Because this is deep. This is really deep. The only one that I think that might have some upside personally is Day.
James, any thoughts?
I'm going to echo what Gary said. I like to fancy myself as the deep league guy who likes to rank many, many, many players, many, many, many players deep. And while I haven't put out rankings in a little bit, and that may be changing, my most recent rankings for defensive linemen were the top 150. And of those top 150, only one of the three players that Vic mentions cracked my top 150, and that'd be Sebastian Joseph Day. Does Tim Settle have some potential in Washington to leap up and just become that, dominant guy in the middle who's just getting a lot of production by default because that's where they're running the ball? Sure. Am I going to wait around and find out? Nope. Let me go get somebody who's got more current production, and that's why I'll lean Sebastian Joseph Day. But like Gary said, this is a deep question. It's a very deep question. If you made the quote-unquote wrong decision here, you're not going to be making that wrong of a decision. It's a total crapshoot. So sure, you want to attach to the Washington defense, go for it. You want to attach to the Houston defense where someone might rise up because that defense is atrocious. Sure, you want to go for a guy like Joseph Day who's also tied to a good defense, go right ahead. It's almost kind of not a good answer, but you're not dealing with anyone really of consequence. So this isn't where I'd be focusing my thoughts. I'd probably focus my thoughts elsewhere and just kind of roll with Joseph Day and just that's that.
Yeah, I'm really curious, Vic. If you can, skip that whole. We can't look at your waiver wire right now, but if you could chime in and let us know what size of league this is. I mean, like we said, we're so far. I don't know about Craig, but we're leaning towards Day. I think what he might actually start next to Arnold, but I mean, he's taken a position which is the technique that allows Arnold to do everything, and he's more of a body. So I think Brockers just left there.
Yep, he's in Detroit.
Man, good luck.
This is where I'd sort of want to know more about, you said regular IDP settings, but if it leans any more towards tackle heavy or big play heavy, because just if you look at, what the two of them have done between Settle and Joseph Day, I mean, to Gary's point, Joseph Day is a body there that can get tackles, whereas Darnold is more of the pressure guy and getting the tackles. I mean, he's just an all-around beast. But Day isn't going to be used that way, where Settle is going to pick up, I think, probably more sacks than he has in the past just because of what's around him, and there's more opportunity when he's on the field, but he just doesn't get you those tackles. So of those two jumped out initially, and they are sort of different types of players. So one of them may be more appropriate for your league, and that's something, to James's point, you would know better than us at this time. All right, this is our last group of linebackers we have listed here for tonight, and these are some bigger names, Gary, so maybe it'll be easier for you, maybe it'll make it a little bit harder. But of the Titans, linebackers here, Harold Landry, Bud Dupree, and Jane Brown. Which of those three do you like the most?
Well, I'm starting in a balanced format like we're talking about. I'm starting Jane Brown. I think that as long as he can be on the field, he's going to be productive. From a sleeper app aspect, because if we were in any other site that didn't use LB, DL/ or an Edge, which it would be like ESPN or something, Bud Dupree and Harold Landry really aren't going to come into play unless they are in a sack heavy league. But in this situation, I think we have sleeper in mind. So I'm going to go Jam Brown, and I'm a Harold Landry fan. I thought that he had a little bit more in the tank than he showed, though. But Bud Dupree could be a blindside rusher, outside linebacker on any other defense in this league that run a 3-4. He just happened to be on the same defense as TJ Watt, which people seem to forget. I believe Bud Dupree was a first-round pick, 26th overall or something, and he's been doing it from the strong side in Pittsburgh. I'm really interested to see him coming off his ACL tear, which I looked into, and apparently they're bringing him along fine, and he's doing okay. I think that if he's given the opportunity, his ceiling may be higher than Landry's. I think I've seen enough of Landry. We've seen him next to Jeffrey Simmons, which is actually Jeffrey Simmons is a beast of a interior defensive lineman, but they haven't quite put it together. And I think the reason that Bud Dupree was brought in when they already had Simmons on the interior defensive line and you already had Landry, I think is because they're still lacking a little bit and they're looking for that guy to take them over the top. So for me, I hate to say it, I'm cutting Landry. I'm going to bench Dupree, see what happens, and I'm going to start Brown.
James?
This is getting defensive, so I feel very odd not being so defensive with Gary because I'm going to be making different selections, but I agree with 100% of what he said. I'm going to be starting Landry because I think Landry's going to get the current opportunity to play and perform, and I think Dupree is going to be on the other side getting more attention, which from a fantasy standpoint means Landry might get more production. He was already very good last year, and I think Landry could take a step forward because of Dupree's presence. So I will buy Landry, and I will start him, and because I like to make this mention every time I can, he's also DL qualified as well as linebacker. So let me slide Landry in at my defensive lineman position and enjoy that. I like Jayon Brown. I've got nothing wrong with him. I think there's a lot of questions out there in the fantasy community. Is he going to lose his role? Is he going to not have his snaps? And I just kind of think that's overblown. Until the Titans bring in someone to replace him, he's going to be the guy. He might not be the best real-world linebacker of all time, but he's still pretty dang good, and he's still very, very good in fantasy. So I'll throw him on my bench with the idea that he easily could start, and I'm just starting Landry because of his multi-positional flexibility. And then I'm going to cut Dupree. And it's not because I don't like Dupree. I like him. Our other two examples, I didn't like anybody. I like all three of these guys better than I liked anyone else. And Dupree just gets cut by default because I think he's going to get more attention than Harold Landry. In a weird way, when it comes to IDP, if you've got two guys who are about equal, you almost kind of want the lesser one in skill because they should have more opportunity. It's odd, but that's how this works. And I think I give a slight edge to Dupree in skill, which means give me Landry.
All right. And as we're running down here on time a bit, I'm going to jump down to get one of these safeties in here quick. And I think it's the more interesting, more fantasy relevant names throughout. So we'll see if there's a difference here. James, we'll start with you for the Rams safeties. Taylor Rapp, Jordan Fuller, and then Terrell Burgess. And I think I have an idea who you guys might end up cutting, but I'm more interested in who you guys feel like you're going to be starting and then benching out of these three. So go ahead, James.
So I'm going to go with Jordan Fuller. I'm going to start him and believe in him, and I'm going to question my logic, but that's just what I'm going to do. I think he can build upon his season from last year in whatever format you think he will do it, and I believe in him. So short and sweet there. I love Taylor Rapp. I think he's great, but I don't know how much the Rams believe in Taylor Rapp. So I'm going to stuff him on my bench, and if the Rams don't believe in him, he will be off my roster, and I will be adding someone else. And then that means I'm going to be cutting our final person, which is Terrell Burgess. There's not enough playing time for you as long as Rapp is the guy, and in a world where Rapp is not the guy and you get to play, well, I made a mistake, but that's what this game is.
Fuller is actually calling the defensive plays right now. If you all hadn't heard, they've taken it away from Kaiser, or maybe John Johnson did it last year. But either way, folks, watch Ernest Jones, the rookie. He's going to lead them in combined tackles this year. But anyways, Jordan Fuller, he is the closest one, and this is not just because I'm a Ohio State fan. He's the closest one to replace John Johnson talent-wise. He flashed last year. Taylor Rapp has had that opportunity. He's got some playing time. He's just a guy. So for me, it's definitely Fuller start. Rap, man, I'll go ahead and bench him. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to keep an eye on Burgess when I cut him because Taylor Rapp can be replaced.
That was my thinking too. Fuller, once he got that green dot and was coming out that he was calling the plays, like you said, I think it was Johnson that did it last year for him. And then how he was used last year when he was healthy, even. I liked what I saw out of Fuller. To your point, Taylor Rapp to me is just a guy. He's a guy that I had picked up in a couple IDP leagues. And then after I think it was his rookie year, that big year, I sold high on him. And I'm happy with that decision to this point. So.
Well, history dictates. I mean, what the Rams do, we should see Rapp on the field all the time if he sticks. Fuller on the field all the time if he sticks, and then your third safety in is Terrell Burgess. So it's kind of, as the depth chart sits right now, Burgess is not going to get the snaps as long as he doesn't. He'd have to overtake Rapp. So.
And that's going to about do it for us tonight here. So make sure that you check Gary out at the IDP Tipster over on Twitter. James, you can find at WhatMoney3000. And remember, they have the 2021 Gridiron Ratings online draft guide contest. Gary, every 25, you draw a new name and someone gets a free one. So, hey,
go subscribe,
folks. It's a great product, and it's definitely worth the cost itself. But if you can get one for free, who doesn't like free stuff?
Yep.
And Getting Defensive is going to be back Thursday night again. And I am not sure. You guys you talked about the AFC North last week. I'm not sure which division you're tackling this week. Do you know?
Yeah, let me take a quick pick here, or a quick peek here. Let's see. That would be the 12. No, not 100% sure. It's penciled in AFC North, but I could have swore we just did that. So it's probably just a copy. Nope, folks, make sure you tune in Thursday night. We're going to have some divisional coverage. And yes, please subscribe. Win that $40 value draft guide because you're always going to be in that poll every time that we draw a name out of the bucket. And, every 25, I think we were at like 133 or 34, maybe 35 the last time I seen. And we've been on here a short time, and we really appreciate our subscribers. So, hey, subscribe, win, and I'm done.
It's going to do it for us. Have a good night, everyone, and tune in on Thursday.